What's up, guys? Hope you're having a good day. Before we get into breaking down this weekend's fights, I just want to spend a few minutes talking about something that I take really seriously. I just want to get it off my chest. So straight off the bat, I want to apologise to anyone that lost money betting on Sean O'Malley last weekend based on the breakdown video that I put out for that fight. At the end of the day, you can't win every bet. We all know the risks with gambling. And I always say, do your own research, gamble responsibly. But ultimately, if you're watching these videos, you're going to be watching them to gain information that will hopefully enable you to earn some extra cash on the weekends. And this is really important to me personally, because before I started betting on the UFC, I literally had nothing. I was so broke, I could not afford gas, electricity, couldn't afford to buy food. It was bad, and the UFC helped me improve my life tremendously. I was able to earn enough money from gambling to put a down payment on buying a house, and I just improved it. It completely changed my life, right? But I know how hard it was back when I didn't have any money, and how much of a struggle it was. And it was actually around 2008, during the last financial crisis, before the one we're going through now. So I know what it feels like to be struggling financially. Is absolutely brutal, and we're in really, really tough times. Cost of living's crazy. Inflation has made all our lives a lot more difficult. People are starting to lose their jobs, and the world and life is just really brutal right now. So I do take what I do really seriously, and it kills me inside. It keeps me up at night when I have done something which I know will have resulted in people losing money, because in these times money is not easy to come by, and it's tough, and it's a struggle. So I really, really want to say sorry for that. I obviously have a very conservative style of betting. I only place maybe two or three pre-fight bets on average per month, and I obviously place 10 times that amount on football, and a lot more UFC live as well. Track me. But I'm very conservative when it comes to pre-fight betting. And the problem that I've got with pre-fight bets is just logistically the way my life works. I don't have time to cover every fight on YouTube. Every time I put one of these videos out, there's people in the comments telling me I talk too much, which I'm probably doing now. Telling me these videos are too long, they're too detailed, I need to make them quicker, right? And so, I only break down the main card on these YouTube videos. If I were to break down an entire UFC card, if I was to break down this entire card this weekend, this video would probably be 3 or 4 hours long. Because I do break down every card on my website, right? If you go to my website, you can find breakdown videos for every single fight on every single UFC card. And there's 3-4 hours of videos put out every week. But the problem I've got is I can't share everything I'm doing on YouTube. It's just not practical. This week, for example, this weekend's card, I've still got 3 fights to research. And this video probably won't hit YouTube until Friday. So usually I'm still researching fights on the Saturday. So the point I'm trying to make is really frustrating, because I can only share on YouTube part of the stuff that I do when it comes to pre-fight betting on the UFC, because I didn't actually even make a loss last weekend. I had 2 bets. We obviously lost the unit on O'Malley, but then we won a unit on Bahamondes, so it was a break-even night. So it wasn't a disaster, but I know if you're watching the video on YouTube, you wouldn't have seen the Bahamondes bet. And just for the record, I'm going to be betting on Cavalcanti this weekend to beat Cornell. And there won't be a breakdown for that either, because it's on the prelims. We don't cover the prelims in these videos, because I'm still going to be researching the prelims, probably still into Saturday. So yes, I'm always in a difficult position, because I do need to put a lot of time into the fight research, probably a lot more time than most. And this isn't a dig, this isn't me criticizing anyone else in the space. It's just that I've built my career off live betting on the UFC, and I specialize on live betting on the UFC. And the reason why we have such a big edge live betting on the UFC, the reason why we make a profit most weeks, is just because I put so much time into the research that we do have a big edge, so that when the fights are taking place, we can kind of see into the future and predict how that fight's going to continue to go based on what I've seen in the past matchups. This is why fight research takes me a lot longer than most people, and I'm obviously, you know, football is also a big part of what I do. I'm trying to earn 100% of my income from betting on football, and so I spend like 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 hours a day betting football as well. So I do feel bad in situations like last week where I may have put a bet out where some of you guys lost money on O'Malley, but we had the bet on Bahamondes, and this week we'll have the bet on Cavalcanti. If you want to see the breakdown video for the Bahamondes fight, which was obviously posted to the website, I'll leave a link in the description below so you can check it out, see the reasons why I did bet Bahamondes. But yeah, it's a bit of a shit situation. Because if you look, and this is not, I never really talk too much about pre-fight betting in these videos. I hate to do the whole boom, crushed it. Like, if you go on my Twitter, if you go on my Instagram, you'll never see me be like the whole boom, we smashed it, boom, we crushed it, you know, yeah, smashed it, blah 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 blah. You'll never hear me brag about how we're doing. You'll never even see me really talk about how I'm doing online. Just in these YouTube videos we cover it, but I don't really like boom, easy winner on Bahamondes, bruv, I'm so cool, bang 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 boom. It's cringe as fuck. I never do that. And maybe I should do more of it, because people generally just don't really know how I'm doing. They make assumptions. But as you can see, we do pretty well pre-fight betting on the UFC. Here's our results chart. Over the last sort of 18 months, we've done really well. We've made almost 30 units of profit over the last 18 months. We've just been consistently trending up. So we do great. We do really good pre-fight betting on the UFC. I don't like pre-fight betting on the UFC as much as live betting, because it's a lot more fraught with like swings and variance and chaos. If you look at live betting, it's a lot more steady, a lot more consistent. Whereas if you look at pre-fight betting, we have a lot of nasty dips. There's one real nasty one there, nasty one there, nasty one there, a really nasty one here. But now we're on a nice steady uptrend. So yeah, we do good pre-fight betting on the UFC, but my style's very conservative. Don't place many bets, maybe 2 or 3 a month. But the thing is, when we do place bets pre-fight betting on the UFC, they do have a pretty good hit rate. We do perform well, and as you can see over the long term, we have a nice steady consistent uptrend, which is great. It's really good. But a lot of people make assumptions as to how I'm doing based on YouTube thumbnails, which is tricky, because there's obviously a lot more to what I do. But yeah, I just wanted to say sorry. And I'm in a tricky position where it's annoying that sometimes I do harm. And it's kind of like, I know what it feels like to be broke. In these tough economic times, I want to help people. I really want to help people. And it's kind of like that doctor's motto, right? Do no harm. So when I do harm, it doesn't sit right with me. It's the type of shit that keeps me up at night. So I am really sorry for what happened with O'Malley. Fundamentally, the reason for the bet was there was a reasonably good chance Dvalishvili had a staph infection, and the win rate for fighters that have staph infections is utterly horrendous. So if ever I get an opportunity to bet against a guy that might have a staph infection in the even money odds range, I'm going to take it, because they very, 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 very rarely win when they do have staph. And to be fair, even though we don't know whether Dvalishvili did or didn't have staph, I actually think he did, because he looked pretty tired in the 4th and 5th rounds, which you wouldn't have expected. He didn't really exert much energy in the first 3 rounds. O'Malley made life very easy for him. So he probably did have staph and was still good enough to get the job done. But yeah, I just want to say I'm really sorry. And I can't really say I'll do better, boys. I can't really say like, oh, you know, I'm going to do better, because to be fair, we do really good. We do really good, right? These are my betting results for moneyline bets and over-unders. So we do really good. It's not like I can be like, I'm going to do better, because we're doing good. 30 units over the last 18 months is pretty good. But obviously, good chunk of these bets are not on YouTube, like the over-unders prelim fights, right? So I'm sorry, man, but man, I'll try and dig up some winners for us on these main card fights. We might have some next week, to be fair. I haven't researched the fights yet, but looking at next week's main card, I do like Pennington. I do like Bautista. I also do like Lucindu. I haven't researched those fights yet. I haven't placed any bets yet, but I'm optimistic that Bautista, Lucindu, and Pennington could be pretty good bets. So maybe next week can hook you guys up and you can earn a bit of cash back. Hopefully, you can see I'm betting Cavalcanti this weekend. Their odds have declined a bit since I bet her earlier on in the week. But I've actually since researched the fight between Taylor Lapoulos and Vince Morales, which I also will not be covering in this video. But I think if you didn't want to bet Cavalcanti at this steep odds range, I think a parlay with Lapoulos and Cavalcanti should win a very high percentage of the time. That pays like 1.87, which is probably about what you would have lost. Will probably cover about what you lost on O'Malley if that were to come through. Obviously, no guarantees. Anything can happen in MMA. But over the long term, we do great. So hopefully that will come through. Enough rambling. Let's get into some breakdown videos. Really sorry, boys. I just demoralizing. It's a tough job, man. Do no harm. That's my motto, right? Do no harm. I try not to do any harm. I did harm last week, so we need to try and repair that damage. Okay, for those of you that obviously not in my community and did not get in on the Bahamondes bet, I'll leave a link below for you to check that out. The breakdown for the Bahamondes fight. Okay, so now let's break down the main event of this weekend's card, which is going to be Benoit Saint-Denis versus Renato Moicano. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Saint-Denis is a pretty big favourite at average odds of about 1.36, which is going to be minus 278 for an implied probability of 74%. We take a look at the odds on Moicano. He's around an average of, say, 3.30, which is going to be plus 230 for an implied probability of 30%. So Moicano is 35 years old. He is 5'11 with a 72-inch reach. And Saint-Denis, 28 years old, 5'11 with a 73-inch reach. So we can see both guys pretty much the same size. There is a pretty big age gap between these two. Benoit Saint-Denis is 7 years younger than Moicano. And we know that the younger fighter wins around 65% of the time when there's a 7-year age gap in a fight. And I do think that the age difference between these two is pretty significant in the sense that we've seen Moicano start to decline, whereas Saint-Denis at just 28 years old should be making big improvements from fight to fight. So these guys are at the stages in their career where they are on opposite career trajectories, and that definitely favours Saint-Denis, who is on the come up. We also know Moicano's pretty chinny, and his chin isn't going to get better with age. So the other X factor to take into consideration on this one is that Saint-Denis has home advantage this weekend. We know the atmosphere on these Paris cards is lively, to say the least. The French fans really get behind the French fighters. We know home advantage is going to be massive this weekend, so judges are going to favour the French fighters, and the French fighters will also get a lift from the crowd, and that's pretty big for a guy like Saint-Denis that definitely feeds off the energy of the crowd. So in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, I think this is a fight where the odds are definitely wide. And if you want to bet this fight, you kind of have to take Moicano. It has to be dog or pass based on the fact that Saint-Denis is so reckless in all aspects of MMA that he's never going to be a guy that you can trust in this odds range. So if you're asking me for a pick on this fight, right, pick who's going to win, I'm going to say Saint-Denis. Saint-Denis is more likely to win, but at an implied probability of 74%, the odds just don't make sense on this fight for me. In many ways, for me, this fight is kind of like the Ryan Nelson versus Steve Garcia fight a few weeks ago, and again, this goes back to, you know, a dilemma that we often run into in pre-fight betting, where it's kind of like, how is value perceived in fights where you know your money is going to be in a lot of danger? I would love to have like a deep conversation about this topic with people, maybe like on a podcast or something, where it's kind of like, you can look at a guy like you know, Carl Nelson, right? In his fight against Steve Garcia, and Carl Nelson's the underdog, and there's no doubt there's value on Nelson. I didn't bet Nelson, by the way, but there's no doubt there's value on Nelson. Just like there's no doubt there's value on Moicano this weekend in the odds range they're at. But if they both get brutally knocked out in 40 seconds, does it even matter? Where do you stand on that topic? Because Saint-Denis is more likely to win, right? And if Saint-Denis wins this weekend, your money's dead in the water. You never get to roll that dice again. You never get to flip that coin again to get your money back on Moicano. But the odds are very wide on this one. Let's talk about the reasons why. So, in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, this is an area where Saint-Denis does have a big advantage. We've already said the Moicano is pretty chinny. Saint-Denis is aggressive. He hits very hard. He's got a devastating kick game. He's got true legit knockout power. But the thing about Saint-Denis is that he's also very reckless. And so while Moicano's not the most dangerous, Moicano's more of a volume striker, he probably doesn't have the power to make Saint-Denis pay for being so reckless. At the end of the day, it only takes one shot in MMA to end your night. And Saint-Denis' recklessness on the feet makes him always difficult to bet as a big favourite. So for those of you that like to throw, you know, guys into parlays and stuff, I think Saint-Denis is the kind of guy that can get you into a lot of trouble. And we'll show that here, right? Just want to show you a little sequence here. And it's at some point in this round. I think it's here, right? Yeah, it's this sequence here. So Moicano's more of a volume striker. He's not particularly dangerous on the feet. But Saint-Denis gets into a lot of positions like this. And if you look at his record, a lot of the time it works out for him, right? He's got a lot of quick finishes on his record. But it only takes one shot to end your night. So in this sequence here, look at how reckless and open Saint-Denis is on the feet. Just kind of comes forward, winging these big wide hooks, and he is wide open to counters. You know, he eats a big right-hand counter there from Moises, and then shoots a takedown. But if we just slow this right down, just look at this sequence here. His hands are down low, his chin is up high. Look, he eats a huge right hand there from Moises. Just takes it. It's another left hand there. And there's a big one coming now. Look at this big right hand. Look at that. And that got Benoit Saint-Denis' attention, which is why he shot that takedown. So Saint-Denis, for the most part, gets away with this. But you can get away with being very reckless in a cage fight to the death until you can't, right? And then obviously in Saint-Denis' last fight, he was finally made to pay for his recklessness. And look, at the end of the day, we can talk about him having staff, all this kind of stuff. But fundamentally, the reason why he got knocked out in this fight was because of how reckless he was. Look at how reckless he is coming forward and attacking Poirier. And yes, I know he's tired because of staff and he's sloppy on the feet. But look, he's just kind of walking forward, hands down low, chin up high. It's a big right hand there. And like, you can see it coming, right? You can see it coming. Look at this sequence here. You can see it coming, right? Hands down low, chin up high, eats a clean left hand there. Poirier's one of the most dangerous strikers in the history of the lightweight division. And this guy, Saint-Denis, is just plodding forward like he did against Moises. Look, big left hand there. The warnings are there. The warnings are there. The warnings are there. Jab there, right hook there. Still his hands are down low. And then he's made to pay. So look, is Moicano the kind of guy that is going to make Benoit Saint-Denis pay for being reckless? Probably not. He's more of a volume striker. But when we're talking about implied probabilities of 74%, you just can't fuck with those odds. It's not worth it. You can't fuck with those odds. It's too risky. So, in terms of how they match up when it comes to grappling, this is an area where I do think Moicano could potentially have a huge advantage. So, Moicano's quite deceiving in that he's quite lean. You know, he's quite skinny in many ways, whereas when you look at Saint-Denis, he's strong, he's muscular, he's physically imposing. You'd think that Saint-Denis would be the stronger guy on the ground, which he might be. But Moicano's a very interesting fighter in that even though he is quite lean and quite skinny, he has a very physically imposing ground game. And this is tiring. And the thing about Benoit Saint-Denis is we don't know too much about his cardio. If we look at his record, he gassed out pretty bad against Dustin Poirier after just a few minutes. But ultimately, you can let him off the hook for that one because he had staph, which we know affects cardio. And then you've got these 5 fights here that all ended very quick. Too quick for us to really assess his cardio, especially in a 5-rounder. And then if you go and look at his fight against Elizeu Zaleski dos Santos, he did slow down, he did gas out in that fight. But it was his UFC debut, and I never want to be too harsh on guys for their UFC debut. And also, he obviously took a lot of damage in that fight, which can make him potentially look more tired than he is if he's a little bit punch-drunk and sloppy because of that. And of course, Zaleski pushed a pretty high pace as well. But the thing about Saint-Denis is, as well as his recklessness on the feet, I'd be very worried about his gas tank. Because he doesn't have a lot of experience going deep in fights. He's never been 5 rounds. I mean, he's barely even been 3 rounds. And the one time that he didn't look good. Moicano is one of those guys that generally has very, very good cardio. He did randomly gas out against Drew Dober in a performance that didn't make much sense. And he also slowed against Rafael dos Anjos, but he took that fight on short notice at a catch weight. So again, just like there's reasons that Saint-Denis gassed against Poirier, there's also reasons why Moicano would gas against RDA. But generally speaking, Moicano's cardio is very good. He's got obviously a lot more experience going deep in fights than Saint-Denis does. And his style of grappling can really tire you out. So grappling in this fight is a potential path to victory for Moicano. Because if we take a look at Benoit Saint-Denis' takedown offense and ground game, it's not good. Actually, it's not good. And what I want to do is kind of just skim through some fights just to kind of show you the issues with his takedown defense. Because he does have a pretty nasty habit of giving up cheap takedowns. Now, against the guys that Saint-Denis has been facing, it's not that big of a deal because he's been so strong on the ground that he's been able to quickly work his way back up to his feet. But we've already said that Moicano has excellent grappling control, you know, really good takedowns. And so even though it hasn't, you know, Benoit Saint-Denis having bad takedown offense hasn't cost him up until this point in his career, doesn't mean it won't cost him on Saturday against Moicano. So here's one here against Frevola. Gives up a cheap takedown here. See Frevola, well, he kind of pulls guard on a guillotine, right? As opposed to getting taken down. But you guys get what I mean. It's just, it's a guy flopping to his back, which you never like. He's able to use the butterfly hook on the left side to hit a reversal, which is all very nice. But then you can see he gets taken down again here. Frevola gets in on the legs. You can see Saint-Denis just gets taken down very easily. And the thing is, Moicano's a very good offensive wrestler. You know, good grappling control. You know, decent takedown entries, decent chain wrestling. You can see again, Saint-Denis just stands back up. So Saint-Denis looks like one of these guys that is difficult to hold down and control. But Moicano's offensive wrestling and grappling control is a lot better than the guys that Saint-Denis been facing. So even though no one's really been able to hold Saint-Denis down, Moicano is so much better than the guys that Saint-Denis has been facing that they may be able to. And you see he gives up a cheap takedown here against Moises. I mean, look at how easily Saint-Denis goes down here. Look how easily he lets Moises get in on the legs. So again, Saint-Denis is very, very difficult to hold down and control. Goes to butterfly guard and is able to elevate Moises and stand back up, similar to how he did against Matt Frevola. But the fact that he is giving up such cheap takedowns has me worried for him against Moicano because of how good Moicano's grappling control is. And sorry to repeat myself, I'm going to try and do less of that in the future. But when we're going through the footage, I just want to show you a couple of examples of the point I'm trying to make so that it really hits home. So yeah, this is one of those fights where it's definitely dog or pass. The problem is Moicano is so fragile on the feet and Saint-Denis is so dangerous that it might not even matter. But if you really want to bet this fight this weekend, I do think all the value is in Moicano. Because an implied probability of 74% on Saint-Denis is kind of nuts. So if we consider the over-under on this one, I'd be very surprised if this fight went to a decision. Obviously, the odds reflect that. The over 1.5 rounds is interesting because if we get a lot of grappling, that will likely hit. My concern would be if Saint-Denis comes out the gate super hard and just KOs Moicano dead early, which could easily happen with how chinny Moicano is, how dangerous Saint-Denis is. So in terms of most likely outcomes for the props, do you know what? When it comes to prop bets, I'm always looking for divergences, little opportunities in the props where the odds feel very wide, where we may not necessarily pick the most likely outcome, but we are picking bets that have a good risk to reward ratio. So we've obviously played a bit of footage of Saint-Denis looking very reckless on the feet. So we know he's very susceptible to a knockout. But I'm always also thinking that even though Moicano loves a choke on the ground and he's very, very slick with the back takes and the rear naked chokes, if Saint-Denis does gas out in this fight, it's possible that Moicano could put him in a bad position, get a stoppage ground and pound, which would also count as a TKO. So the odds on Moicano to win inside the distance aren't great. But the odds on Moicano to win by knockout or TKO are kind of crazy. 15.0 plus 1,400. Is it the most likely outcome on this fight? No. Is it likely to hit? No. But the thing is, when you're placing bets on things in this odds range, you don't need to win many of them over the long term to earn a profit. With how reckless Saint-Denis is on the feet, the fact that he may slow down and find himself in some bad positions on the ground, this ain't bad. That's not a bad one. So if you like to bet props, you might want to consider that one this weekend. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's move on to the next fight on this card, which is going to be Brendan Allen versus Nasruddin Imavov. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Imavov is the favourite at average odds of about 1.47, which is going to be minus 213 for an implied probability of 68%. If we take a look at the odds on Allen, he's around an average of 2.75, which is going to be plus 175 for an implied probability of 36%. So Imavov is 28 years old, 6'3" with a 75-inch reach. Allen is 28 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach. So both guys are about the same size. They are the same age. And the only X factor really to consider on this one is that Imavov has home advantage. So again, this fight's close. Judges probably going to lean more towards Imavov, so it's something to consider if you are thinking of betting on Allen this weekend. But just with the way that the odds are set up, just like I feel that Moicano gives you a better risk to reward ratio in the main event simply because of how steep Saint-Denis' odds are, I also feel that's the case with Brendan Allen. And I actually feel Allen is probably if we look at all the fighters on the main card, yeah, if you don't really classify Frevola as an underdog because he's in the even money odds range, I would say that Allen's probably the livest underdog on the main card, simply because there's a lot of issues in Nassourdine Imavov's skill set that Allen could potentially exploit, but it's not going to be easy to overcome home advantage, and that's one of the biggest risk factors with our bet on Cavalcanti this week. I don't feel great betting against the French fighter Nora Cornell, who's already arguably won a robbery in Paris with a dodgy decision win over Jocelyn Edwards. So, how do these two match up stylistically? Why is Allen probably the better underdog odds? And again, we're not talking about picks. If you're asking me who I'm picking to win, I'm picking Imavov. He's more likely to win. But in terms of the risk to reward ratio and the odds on Imavov are just shit. You know, in order to get any value, you've got to cap him at better than 68%. I just prefer to have money on the underdog in this situation if I were to bet this fight, which I'm not going to. So, how do they match up? Well, in terms of striking, it is an interesting one. When I researched this fight, I was quite surprised at how bad Allen's striking, defense and boxing was. I thought it was a lot better than it was. So, on the feet, to some extent, I give Imavov the advantage. He's the more technical striker out of the two. He's the better boxer. He's certainly better defensively. My big issue with Imavov when it comes to striking is that at times his volume can be pretty low. If we take a look at his record, you can see that he's been involved in fights that, you know, this one went to a majority decision, this one went to a majority decision. Whenever you see a fighter who's gone to a few majority decisions, split decisions, it often reflects that they don't do a particularly good job of putting their stamp on rounds, and I feel that is sometimes the case with Imavov. He's one of these guys that will chip away at his opponents, but he'll often not really throw a particularly high volume of strikes or land particularly damaging, impactful strikes. So if you look at the striking stats for Imavov, he may land a decent number on paper, but in terms of the actual damage that he does, in a lot of rounds he doesn't do a whole lot. He's kind of just touching his opponents with range-finding kicks and jabs. So even though Allen's not the best boxer and he's not the best defensively, I don't feel Imavov is like super well positioned to exploit that, because Imavov's not a particularly dangerous striker. And you can see that by how frequently he goes deep in fights, right? He's been to a decision in 3 of his last 5. This fight was stopped under weird circumstances. Good chance that one would have gone to a decision as well. And he also went deep against Cannonier. So Imavov's not the kind of guy that can really make Allen pay for his bad defense. And when we're talking about Imavov's biggest weakness being, you know, struggling to put his stamp on rounds, not throwing the highest volume of meaningful, impactful strikes, that's an area of opportunity for Allen, because Allen is very aggressive. Allen does throw a high volume of strikes. Allen does land harder, more damaging, more impactful shots than Imavov, in my opinion. And even though Imavov is the more technical striker, I feel that Allen can make the stand-up exchanges between these two very interesting, with sheer work rate, volume and aggression. And so it's not going to be easy for Allen to win rounds on the feet against Imavov, with Imavov having home advantage. But I think Allen can hold his own for sure. Now, an area in this fight where Allen definitely has an advantage is on the ground. We haven't seen Imavov's takedown defense and ground game tested too much in the last couple of years, because he hasn't really fought any fighters that have really committed to getting him to the ground. But what we do know about Imavov is that his takedown defense is pretty bad. He can be pretty weak off his back as well. And he's also one of these guys that can spend a really long time working through bad positions on the ground. So while Allen isn't the best offensive wrestler, and he's not one of these guys that's just going to spam takedowns for 3 rounds relentlessly, if Allen does get this fight to the ground, or if Allen were to come into the fight with a grappling heavy game plan, I give Allen a pretty huge advantage on the ground over Imavov. I think Imavov's ground game is deceptively terrible, and he hasn't really been made to pay for it, because we haven't seen a whole lot of guys try to expose him on the ground. But I think a semi-decent grappler like Allen could. And the thing is, Allen doesn't usually grapple very hard. He'll shoot the odd takedown here and there, but he won't be persistent with it. So even though Allen does have this huge advantage on the ground, it may not actually mean anything in the context of this fight, because if Allen doesn't grapple hard enough to get Imavov down and control him for a decent period of time, and the fight does end up staying standing, which I think is most likely outcome, then we know Imavov does probably have the edge and will most likely win. So that's basically how I see this fight. It's dog or pass. If you're going to bet this fight this week, you've got to take Brendan Allen. The odds on Imavov are pretty steep, but obviously you are going to be putting your money in a lot of danger betting on an American against a French guy in Paris. So in terms of the over-under on this one, very likely this fight goes to a decision. Both guys are very tough. Both are well-rounded. We can see Imavov, like I say, frequently goes deep in fights. And if we look at Allen, even though he's got a lot of finishes, he frequently goes deep in fights as well. We can see decision, third round decision. And with how tough Imavov is, I don't think it's particularly likely Allen gets a finish here. So I definitely lean towards the over 2.5 rounds. I'm probably not going to be betting it because the atmosphere in Paris is going to be crazy. Fighters might feed off the energy of the crowd. These guys might go to war. I'm probably not going to be betting the over. Hopefully we can find better over-unders on this card to snipe. But my lean would be the over. In terms of the prop bets on this one, Allen by decision is interesting to me. But his odds in percentage terms aren't like significantly better than his money line odds. So if you really want to bet this fight, instead of going for a prop, I would probably say just take Allen money line. But I'm not going to be betting this fight because I don't really want to bet against a French person in France because of hometown judging, unless we get an opportunity to do it on someone like Cavalcanti, who I feel has overwhelmingly huge advantages stylistically over their opponent. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Joanderson Brito versus William Gomis. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Gomis is the underdog at average odds of about 3.40, which is plus 240 for an implied probability of 29%. And if we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Brito, he's around an average of 1.33, which is going to be minus 303 for an implied probability of 75%. So Brito is 29 years old, 5'8" with a 72-inch reach. Gomis is 27 years old, 6 foot tall with a 73-inch reach. So both guys with about the same reach, both guys about the same age, but we know Gomis is going to be a little bit longer and taller. I think any advantage from being longer and taller is going to be negated by the power and physicality of Brito, so I don't think size is really going to come into this. And of course, the other X factor that we've got to take into consideration is that Gomis is French, so he's going to have home advantage on his side. Judges are more than likely going to favour him in a close fight. Now, this is one of those matchups where when you research it, there's no doubt that it's a great stylistic matchup for Brito for so many reasons. Gomis is a guy with very bad takedown defense who's very weak off his back. Gomis is the kind of guy that'll give up cheap takedowns, and if you do put him on his back, he'll kind of just lie on his back doing nothing. He won't really show much urgency to get back up to his feet. And we know Brito is small, compact, muscular, he's strong, he's athletic, he's powerful, he's physically imposing. So Brito is more than capable of taking Gomis down pretty easily and controlling him on the ground. So that's one reason why this is a great fight for Brito. The second reason why this is a great fight for Brito is that he's an absolute tank on the feet. He hits very hard. He's got big power. Gomis doesn't really have that. Gomis is more technical than Brito, but he's much more of a volume striker. So Brito can legitimately hurt Gomis on the feet with his power, his physicality. So that's another reason to like Brito in this fight. A third reason to like Brito in this matchup is that Gomis tends to be a pretty low volume striker that struggles to put his stamp on rounds. Now again, if you go look at Gomis's striking stats, it may look on paper like he throws a decent volume, but similar to Imavov, most of the stuff that Gomis throws is like range finding kicks and jabs that don't really do much damage and don't really leave that much of an impression on the judges, whereas everything Brito throws is from the hip, is from hell, and is to try and kill you. So Brito is landing the harder, more impactful stuff. So this is one of those fights that when you look at it, there's so many reasons to like Brito. But this is also one of those fights where I feel that Brito's advantages are very much baked into the odds. And while this should be an easy fight for him, this should be a fight that he wins very comfortably, his odds just have me feeling uneasy. Because while he does have a lot of advantages over Gomis, from my perspective, in order to bet a fighter in this odds range, they have to have pretty much no ways to lose. They have to have pretty much no major risk factors. Because when you're capping someone in the 80% odds range, which you'd have to do to get any value here at this implied probability, there can't be any major risk factors associated with this fighter in this odds range. And when we look at Brito, he's facing a guy with home advantage. That's a risk factor. We know he slows down as fights wear on, so that's another risk factor. We know Gomis is improving from fight to fight. That's another risk factor. It's just one of those situations where Brito should win a very high percentage of the time. But for me, his odds just aren't worth the risk. There are a couple of X factors here that are too big for me to consider betting him in this odds range. But for the reasons that I described, it's a good fight for Brito. If it stays standing, he should land the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots. And if he comes in with a grappling heavy game plan, he should be able to get Gomis down pretty easily and control him on the ground pretty easily. So in terms of the over-under on this one, it's a tricky one. It is actually a tricky one because we haven't really seen Gomis on the ground with a really high-level grappler. Brito's got nasty back takes. He is aggressive on the ground. We saw him submit Jonathan Pierce with a pretty brutal choke. We don't know what Gomis's capabilities are going to be in defending himself on the ground if he gets put in bad positions. So while I kind of lean more towards the over because they're both pretty tough, I don't really know enough about Gomis's ground game to feel confident enough in that to bet it. So I will not be betting the over-under, but my lean would be the over 2.5 rounds on this. I know that Gomis has got I know that Brito has got a lot of quick finishes, but Gomis is reasonably tough and well-rounded, so I think it's more likely this one will go deep. In terms of the prop bets, Brito by decision I think is the most likely outcome. I think he uses grappling to steal rounds, hold Gomis down and control him, but the odds are pretty bad, so I wouldn't bet that personally, and I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Kevin Jousset versus Brian Battle. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see the Battle is the favourite at average odds of about 1.57, which is going to be minus 175 for an implied probability of 64%. And if we take a look at the odds on Jousset, he is around an average of, say, 2.40, which is going to be plus 140 for an implied probability of 42%. So Jousset is 31 years old, 6'2" with a 75-inch reach, and Battle, pretty much the same age and size to be fair, not too much of a difference here. So this is a real interesting stylistic matchup, and in terms of X factors, obviously Jousset's got home advantage. I think he lives and trains in New Zealand, but he's French, so he should have the crowd behind him on Saturday night. Now, this is an interesting matchup because it's potentially a very easy fight for Jousset if he uses a game plan and strategy that he doesn't usually use. So Jousset prefers to stand and strike. Most of Jousset's 12 career fights are stand-up fights, but he's actually got a base in judo, and so he is predominantly a grappler. And we have seen Battle's takedown defense and ground game look very bad in the last couple of years. Now, to be fair to Battle, there are also signs that he's making big improvements to his takedown defense and ground game, but we haven't really seen him face anyone that has really tested his takedown defense and ground game persistently enough to know that those holes in his game are now fixed. So what I'm going to do is explain to you how these two match up when it comes to striking, and then I'm going to show a little bit of footage of the grappling of these two to show you guys why it's quite a complicated fight. So in terms of how they match up when it comes to striking, I do think Battle has a pretty big advantage. Battle's not the most technical guy, but he hits very hard. He's got true legit knockout power. He's reasonably aggressive, and while he's not the best defensively, Jousset is more of a volume striker, so I don't think it's going to matter. Battle is a tough fucker. He hits hard. And the thing about Jousset is he's also quite bad defensively. if you look at Jousset's style of striking, he carries his hands down quite low. He's quite flat-footed. He doesn't move his head much. He is a bit of a sitting duck. If you go back and watch his fight against Keenan Song, while he did cruise to a win, and he did win very comfortably, if you watch that fight back in the cold light of day, you can see that Jousset actually did get dinged a good number of times, and Song did inflict a good amount of damage and land a good amount of clean, hard shots. Just really showing that Jousset's striking defense isn't great. Now, Keenan Song wasn't really able to achieve much with what he landed, but Bryan Battle hits a lot harder than Song. He's a lot more aggressive, a lot more dangerous. So Song had a reasonably good amount of success with his striking, even though the scorecard didn't reflect that. Go back, watch the fight, you'll see what I mean. I think Battle can really hurt Jousset on the feet with how bad Jousset's striking defense looked against Song. But Jousset does have a base in grappling, even though he doesn't grapple very much. So if he does come into this fight with a grappling heavy game plan, he could give Battle big problems. Now, I don't want this breakdown to be super long, so I'm only going to show you footage from one fight of Bryan Battle. But I'm going to explain to you what you can see in his other fights, so that if you want to, you can go do your own research. But the reason why I'm not going to show you stuff from his other fights is because it's just a little bit inconclusive. Doesn't tell us a whole lot. So if we bring up his fight against Rinat Fakhretdinov. Oh God. Can't get the audio. There we go. Sorry about that, guys. So if we bring up his fight against Fakhretdinov, let's get a bit of context for this one. So the Fakhretdinov fight was almost 2 years ago. So this is where this fight starts to become really complicated for betting. Because if you look at Bryan Battle's takedown offense and ground game in this fight against Fakhretdinov, it's absolutely terrible. Really bad. But then in his last 3 fights, he showed flashes of dramatically improved takedown defense. The problem is Angelusa, AJ Fletcher and Gabe Green didn't really commit hard enough to grappling to know how much Battle's takedown offense and ground game has actually improved. So we don't know if the major flaws in his skill set against Fakhretdinov are still there to haunt him. So we'll quickly fly through this fight so you can see the issues for yourself. And then we'll show just a little bit of footage of Jousset to see why grappling may be an opportunity for him. So again, you guys know my perspective on takedown defense. For me, it's not a big issue if you have bad takedown defense, so long as you're able to quickly work your way back up to your feet. But that's not really the case with Bryan Battle. So we can see that he gave up a really cheap takedown here, and just immediately goes to close guard and just looks very weak off his back. So he's been taken down literally, 20 seconds into round 1. And if we skim through, been on the ground for a minute. That's 2 minutes. That's 3 minutes. It takes him about 3 minutes to get back up to his feet. And then he just gives up another cheap takedown. So he's very, very weak on the ground. You can see, look how easily he goes down here, right? Again, gives up a cheap takedown. So the issue for Battle is not so much that his takedown offense is very bad, but it's also that he's very easy to control. Very, very easy to hold down. And what's even more concerning is in a fight like this, where you can see Fakhretdinov gives him, a decent amount of time and space on the bottom to pivot or scramble back up to his feet. He doesn't really take it. Like here, Fakhretdinov's giving him tons of time and space to pop back up to his feet, but instead of using that space to stand back up, he's just more interested in attacking with long shot arm bars and triangles. So then if we go into round 2, we can see again, begin the round 2. Again, Battle gives up a cheap takedown. 10 seconds in. He's been on the ground for a minute. That's 2 minutes. 3 minutes. Eventually pops back up to his feet after about 3 minutes. But again, you can guess what's going to happen. Fakhretdinov gets another easy takedown and spends the rest of the round in top position. You can already guess what's going to happen in round 3. Again, I'm just skimming through this because we don't want these breakdowns to be super long. But again, Or this time he gets a knockdown. But again, you can see Battle just very weak off his back. Just gives up really cheap takedowns. Again, just gives up really cheap takedowns. I'm just skimming through so you can see how bad Battle's takedown defense is. Just real bad, right? So, with Jousset having a base in judo and pretty good cardio, obviously, if Jousset were to come in with a grappling heavy game plan, he could potentially cause Battle big problems. The issue that we've got, well, in fact, there's a couple of issues, right? There's a couple of issues. The first issue is we don't know how much Battle's takedown defense has improved in the last 2 years. Could have improved a lot. Could have improved a hell of a lot. There's signs that it has improved a lot, but at the same time it's inconclusive, so it might not have. But then the other problem we've got with this fight is that we can't trust that Jousset will actually grapple, or try to grapple. But what we can see in this fight, and he only really shoots one takedown at some point in this round, you can see from this takedown entry here from Jousset that his takedown entries, his timing, his positioning on his takedown entries is pretty good. We see it here. Watch. Any second now. Here you can kind of see what I said earlier on in the breakdown where Jousset took a decent amount of damage against Song. You can see he's busted up a bit. Feinted a takedown there. Like, look at that takedown entry, that double leg. Song does a good job of stuffing it with the overhook. But the point being, we saw how easily Fakhretdinov was hitting takedowns on Battle when he got in on Battle's legs. Even though Jousset didn't complete this takedown on Song, if he were to shoot these kind of takedowns on Battle, he would probably get them if Battle hasn't improved his takedown defense that much since the Fakhretdinov fight. So that's why this fight is a complicated one. Because Jousset doesn't usually grapple very much, so it's dangerous to trust him to grapple a lot this weekend. And if he fights like he usually does, he's likely going to get outstruck, possibly even knocked out. But it's risky to bet on Battle, because Battle has this huge hole in his skill set that we've seen in the Fakhretdinov fight, that with Jousset having a background in judo is pretty well positioned to exploit. So this is one of those fights where the odds are probably exactly where they should be. Battle probably should be the favourite based on the fact that Jousset usually stands and strikes, and if this is a stand-up fight, Battle will likely win. Also throw into the mix that Battle has shown signs of improving his takedown defense and ground game, even though that's inconclusive. So those are the reasons why Battle probably should be the favourite. But too big of a favourite for me to trust him with that huge weakness in his skill set, which is his grappling, which Jousset may be able to exploit. So this fight is an easy pass for me. In terms of the over-under, I do think it's more likely that this fight goes deep. But Jousset's striking defense is very bad, and Battle's very mean, nasty, aggressive on the feet. We saw what he did to Looser in his last fight, so I wouldn't rule him out getting a quick finish. I don't love the over-under on this one, to be honest. The odds are pretty steep on the fight to go to a decision. I think it's more likely to go to a decision, but Battle is dangerous, so I wouldn't want to be betting the over on this one at such steep favourite odds. In terms of the prop bets, do you know what? I'm surprised the odds are that good on Battle to win by knockout or TKO. Because even though when we look at Jousset's record, he's only been finished with strikes one time against Madalena, he's also only fought quite a low level of opponent throughout his career. And Battle is mean, nasty, aggressive. Battle goes for the 50 Gs. Battle wants those finishes. He's got true legit knockout power in everything that he throws. So I'm surprised the odds are that generous on Battle to win by knockout or TKO. I quite like that, actually. So yeah, if you want a better prop on this fight to make watching it more interesting, I would go with Battle by knockout or TKO. So I hope you found that one useful. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Gabriel Miranda versus Morgan Charriere. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Miranda is a pretty big underdog at average odds of about 5.75, which is going to be plus 475 for an implied probability of 17%. And if we take a look at the odds on Charriere, he's around an average of 1.15, which is going to be minus 667 for an implied probability of 87%. So Miranda is 34 years old, 5'11 with a 71-inch reach. Charriere, 28 years old, 5'8 with a 69-inch reach. So both guys are roughly the same size, kind of different body types. Charriere more muscular, more smaller, more compact. Miranda a little bit longer and taller at 5'11", but no major size differences here. Miranda is a bit old, 34 years old, getting pretty old for a featherweight, but you know, I don't think it really changes too much in the context of this fight, because Charriere's got a pretty big advantage in my opinion anyway. So this is one of those fights where Charriere is significantly better than Miranda almost everywhere apart from maybe pure Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, but he's certainly the better striker and certainly the better MMA grappler as well. Charriere's got good takedown offense, very difficult to hold down, does give up position a lot on the ground and make a lot of mistakes on the ground, but he's good at recovering and getting away with it because of how scrambly he is. Very technical striker, fights at a decent pace these days. Earlier in his career he was a little bit more passive, but he seems a bit more aggressive now. So this is one of those fights where Charriere is better than Miranda on the feet. He's better than Miranda on the ground. He's got home advantage. He's younger. He's more athletic. He should win easily. But Miranda's one of those guys that's dangerous enough to the extent where you wouldn't want any kind of money in any position on Charriere in this odds range. So this odds range carries an implied probability of 87%, which means in order to throw Charriere in the parlays or bet him in any capacity, you've got to give him a better than 90% chance of winning. And Miranda's not the kind of guy that you can really give anyone a greater than 90% chance of winning against in a cage fight to the death, because Miranda's aggressive and he's one of these guys that has a kill or be killed style. He's aggressive on the feet, he's aggressive on the ground. And in a cage fight to the death, anything can happen, right? If he takes Charriere's back, puts him in a bad position, he can get a finish like he did against Shane Young with the slick back take in his last fight. So this is one of those matchups where Charriere should win, but his odds reflect that. He's a steep favourite. So this fight's a bit dead from a betting point of view. If you really want to bet this fight, you would have to take Miranda. But obviously you're putting your money in a lot of danger because Charriere's got home advantage and he's better than Miranda everywhere. In terms of the over-under on this one, I do quite like the over 1.5 rounds. I am very tempted to bet the over 1.5 rounds, and I might end up betting the over 1.5 rounds. So if you're a member of my community, I will obviously let you know in the Discord if I do end up pulling the trigger. I will have to give this one some more thought. But at the moment, my initial thoughts on the over 1.5 rounds is that even though Miranda has a lot of finishes on his record, he is a tough fucker, and now that he's facing a step up in competition against Charriere, it's not going to be as easy for Miranda to get Charriere out of there. And as you can see, a lot of the fights that have ended inside the distance for Miranda have been against a relatively low level of opponent, which Charriere is not. If we look at Charriere's record, he frequently goes deep in fights, right? This one went deep, decision, deep, decision, deep, decision. And so, yeah, this is one of those fights where I think Miranda's tough enough to hang in there with Charriere. And Charriere is not too dangerous. He's very technical, but he's not too dangerous. Not like he has big power or anything like that. So, yeah, I could see that over 1.5 rounds hitting. I'm quite tempted to bet that. I'll post in Discord if I pull the trigger on it. I'll let you guys know. In terms of the prop bets for this one, most likely outcome for props. Let's see what Charriere by decision is. The odds are a bit dead on that. Yeah, Charriere by decision is the only thing I would really consider, and the odds are a bit dead, so I would give that one a miss. Nothing really too interesting there from a prop bet point of view. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, the final fight on the main card, and it's going to be Ziam versus Matt Steamroller motherfucking Frevola. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Ziam is the slight favourite at average odds of about 1.76, which is going to be minus 132 for an implied probability of 57%. If we take a look at the odds on Frevola, he's around an average of 2.08, which is going to be plus 108 for an implied probability of 48%. So Ziam is 27 years old, 6'1" with a 75-inch reach. Frevola, 34 years old, 5'9" with a 71-inch reach. So we can see that Ziam is 7 years younger than Frevola, which statistically gives him around about a 65% chance of winning. And he's also got a nice 4-inch reach advantage, and he's taller as well. But even though, you know, statistically on paper, the height, the length, the reach of Ziam does give him a statistical advantage, statistics are only useful when they're interpreted correctly, and there are pros and cons to the size difference between these two, because Ziam is very long, he's very lanky, he's very tall, he's very technical, but Frevola is smaller, more muscular, more compact, and so carries a lot of power, and we've seen that in some of his recent fights where he's been able to score big knockout wins. So in terms of how these two match up from a betting point of view, Frevola is a very tempting bet, and Frevola is one of those guys that is just a very, very tempting bet for all the reasons that I'll discuss in this breakdown. When it comes to fights like this, let me just pull up the profit chart on pre-fight betting. So the main reason why we've performed so well over the last 18 months on pre-fight bets, we've made almost 30 units over the last sort of 18 months-ish. The main reason why we've been able to do that is because I'm very conservative with my betting strategy, and I only tend to place bets pre-fight when we're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour, for one reason or another. When we look back through our history of pre-fight betting, and we see these periods of break-even like we had here and here, generally those periods of break-even is because I started to mix it up more and introduce bets where, even though the fighter I was betting had a really good chance of winning relative to their odds, I wasn't overwhelmingly stacking the odds in my favour. And so when it comes to fights like this, as tempting as Frevola is, I have to ask myself, is it worth putting my money in a lot of danger on a guy like Frevola when I know our bet on Cavalcanti this week is very strong? Even if Cavalcanti loses, it's still undeniably a situation where we're overwhelmingly stacking the odds in our favour. And at UFC 307 next week, there's, you know, from what I've seen, a lot of really good potential bets. I think there's some, again, opportunities on next week's card to overwhelmingly stack the odds in our favour. So do I really want to be putting my money on a bet which is going to come with a lot of danger and potentially take a loss, when we can just stick to the strategy that's been working so well for us over the last 18 months? And I made a big change in my strategy here because we were on this downtrend, and I was thinking to myself, I need to fix this shit. So I analysed my results, and I identified some losing trends, right? Some categories of bets that were consistently costing us money. And when I eliminated those type of bets, boom, plus 30 units over the last approximately 18 months. And so the problem with this fight is Frevola's kind of one of those categories of bets that can get us into trouble. Because even though he's so tempting and he has a great chance of winning, there's danger with betting him. So let's explain to you the conundrum, the dilemma with betting this fight. The reasons why I like Frevola and the risks associated with betting him. So obviously straight away, Ziam's got home advantage. He's French. The fight goes to a decision. Quite likely the judges will side with Ziam. So let's kick things off by talking about how they match up when it comes to striking. So similar to William Gomis and Nasruddin Imavov, Ziam has the weakness in his striking in that he doesn't really do a particularly good job of putting his stamp on rounds. So he's a much more technical striker than Frevola. On paper, he throws a decent volume. Like if you look at his striking stats, I'm sure it's about average for the division. But again, like Imavov, like Gomis, the majority of strikes that he lands are just range-finding strikes. They're pitter-patter, jabs, range-finding leg kicks, teep kicks, body kicks, things like that. But Ziam isn't actually really hurting you very often. He doesn't really sit down on his shots. He's not really landing damaging, impactful shots. He's a guy that definitely struggles to put his stamp on rounds. When you look at Frevola, his style of striking is sloppy. It's not technical at all, but he hits like a truck. Everything that he throws is to try and kill you. In many ways, he's a bit like Brito. He's not as technical as Brito, but it's the same sort of vibe where, you know, Gomis and Ziam are more technical strikers, but that raw power, that raw aggression of Frevola and Brito are great equalizers for closing that technical skill gap. So on the feet, while Ziam will probably land more strikes than Frevola and will look more technical doing so, Frevola will likely land the harder, more damaging, more impactful shots. And while there's very little risk of Ziam knocking Frevola out, if you look at Ziam's record, you can see he's an absolute decisionator. It's because he doesn't really have power in his hands, right? You've got to go all the way back to 2017 for the last time Ziam finished a guy with strikes. Sorry, 2018. The last time he finished a guy with strikes. Whereas if you look at Frevola, he's a knockout machine. Everything that he throws is to try and kill you. And he even has a knockout against a very durable opponent in Drew Dober. So with Ziam being one of these long, tall, lanky guys, does keep his chin up a little high. He's better defensively than Frevola, but he's also keeps his chin up a little high. He is wide open to the knockout. So there's a chance that Frevola could knock him out. But the real opportunity for this fight, or for Frevola in this fight, is on the ground. Frevola trains with Miranda, has trained in the past with Aljamain Sterling. Don't think they train together anymore. But Frevola does have a base in wrestling. Now Frevola is one of these guys, similar I guess to Kevin Jousset, in that even though predominantly he does have a base in grappling, he prefers to stand and bang. And when you look on his socials, on his Instagram, his vibe is very much that he wants to build this reputation as being like a warhorse, right? Like a brawler, like a knockout artist. He wants the 50 Gs, right? He's not really thinking about winning fights tactically or strategically. He's not really thinking about building a career in the sport and making a title run. He just wants those bonus checks. He wants to send guys to the Shadow Realm. So while that isn't like Jousset, I'm not saying Jousset is like that. But what I am saying is Frevola and Jousset are predominantly grapplers, but they prefer to stand and strike, and they quite often stand and strike. In fact, they almost always stand and strike. And so this is quite a complicated fight because Ziam's takedown offense and ground game is very bad. So if we bring up his fight against Claudio Puelles, his last fight, you'll see that his takedown offense, ground game, very, very bad. So if we just skim through here, and again, we'll make it real quick. We don't want this breakdown video to be super long. But you can see here, Puelles gets a pretty easy takedown. Ziam goes to butterfly guard, taking a leaf out of Benoit Saint-Denis' book. But goes to butterfly guard. But even from butterfly guard, Ziam quite weak off his back. Not as weak off his back, to be fair, as like a Gomis or a... who else did we say? Brian Battle. My mind went blank there. But you guys know what I'm saying, right? So Ziam gives up another takedown here. Looks a little weaker off his back here. But what I do like about Ziam is he does show a decent amount of urgency to work his way back up to his feet. The problem with Ziam is he just keeps giving up cheap takedowns. There's another one there. Just keeps giving up cheap takedowns. So he's given up 3 cheap takedowns there in round 1 alone. You go into round 2. He wins a scramble there, gets into top position. We're skimming through. See here, gives up another cheap takedown. Good initial takedown defense, but Puelles keeps a hold of that single leg and manages to turn the corner to flatten Mr. Ziam out. Nice outside trip. Ends up getting mounted by Puelles briefly before recovering half guard. Wins a scramble, ends up in top position. But the point being, Ziam's pretty easy to take down. Here you can see he gives up another cheap takedown. Kind of pulls guard on a guillotine. Wins a scramble though, ends up on top. But again, Ziam just a guy that gives up a lot of cheap takedowns. Here you can see he gives up another cheap takedowns. He's given up like 6 cheap takedowns in this fight, right? Again, look how easily Ziam goes down. And again, he does show urgency in working his way back up to his feet. Like you can see here, you know, he only spends about a minute and a half on the ground before he's able to slip his legs out from underneath Puelles and pop back up. But he just does give up a lot of cheap takedowns, right? So you wouldn't have any faith in his takedown defense and ground game against a strong wrestler. You know, someone like a Matt Frevola. So this is one of those matchups where Frevola's a very tempting bet because I think he can win the fight both standing up and on the ground. Standing up, he might not be as technical as Ziam, but he does hit a lot harder and he's aggressive. On the ground, he's definitely the better grappler. It's just that Frevola doesn't choose to grapple very often. So this is one of those fights where Frevola is very, very tempting, to be fair. What I don't love about it is that I don't see the skill gap as being huge. The reason being, Ziam is the more technical striker on the feet. Frevola is very sloppy. And on the ground, because Frevola is quite small, his grappling control may not be the best. Ziam is quite difficult to hold down and control. So even though he may hit takedowns on Ziam, I do think he may struggle to hold Ziam down. And will it get to a point where Frevola, you know, maybe shoots a couple takedowns, gets Ziam down a couple times, and isn't able to rack up much top control, and then thinks to himself, what's the point in me burning through energy and wasting energy to try and get this guy down, only for him to pop back up to his feet quickly? I may as well just stand and bang. And I feel far less confident in Frevola's chances of winning. So my lean is definitely Frevola here. There's no doubt about it. I do think he's the better bet out of the two. And if this fight were in neutral territory, if this fight were in the Apex, I probably would bet Frevola. But with Ziam having home advantage and how biased we know the judges are in France, just have a bad feeling about this one. So I'm probably going to give it a miss. And yeah, let me know what you think, man. Let me know what you think. Frevola's very, very tempting, though. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, reasonably likely the fight goes to a decision. Both guys are tough. Both are well-rounded. But Frevola does have big power in his hands. So if a finish does come, it's likely Frevola with a knockout. But most likely outcome, I think, is this fight going to a decision. I won't be betting it because Frevola is a guy that has a kill or be killed style who will initiate action. But when you look at Ziam, he's an absolute decisionator. So, you know, quite likely this one goes with decision as well, in my opinion. Because I think Ziam's better defensively than these guys, who Frevola's been able to finish. We know Dober's very reckless. Ziam's unlikely to be getting in those kind of rock'em sock'em robot exchanges. Ziam more likely to kind of use his length, try and chip away at Frevola from a safe distance. And in terms of the prop bets on this one, odds on Frevola by decision aren't great. Frevola by knockout TKO not great either. Yeah, I'll probably give the props a miss. But I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. It would help the channel grow a lot. I'd really appreciate it. Growth is so slow. People don't like these long form videos. So your likes really help a lot to grow the channel. And subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, we'll be back next week with another breakdown video for UFC 307. Check out my website, MMABettingTips.com, if you want to make money betting on football or the UFC. Could be very interesting for you. But thank you. Take care, everyone. Love you all. Nice one, guys. See you next week. Take care. Have a great week. Bye.